you. Hi, Dina. Welcome, Isaac. Welcome, Raj. So the session's about supporting startup growth in Africa. Perhaps we can just start with a quick introduction. Dina, would you like to start off just a bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dina Sherif. I'm the executive director of the Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship at MIT, which is based out of the Sloan School of Management. The purpose of the center is to promote entrepreneurship as a pathway to prosperity and sustainable and inclusive growth specifically within emerging markets. We have a very particular focus on Africa since we were launched over 12 years ago. I'm also co-founder of a company based out of Egypt called Ahead of the Curve, which focuses on impact-driven entrepreneurship and responsible business practice across the Middle East. And I'm also a partner in a venture capital fund called Disrupt Tech, which is Egypt's first fintech-focused venture capital fund. I think that's basically me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Dina. Extremely interesting. And next, can I have an introduction from Raj, please?
Hi, good to be here. My name is Raj Kulasingam. I am originally from Malaysia. I live in London. I work at an international law firm called Dentons, where I've been for too many years. But sort of my passion really is, and my sort of side hustle, if you want to call that, is I'm an angel investor. I've been investing as an angel for the last 20 years. My investments are about half and half between UK, Europe, and half in Africa. I've spent the last 20 years advising on transactions in Africa, and that sort of helped me move into this space as an angel investor. I'm involved in a couple of different early stage funds as well as an investor, and glad to be here.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, Isaac, can we hear from you? A quick introduction, please.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Isaac Olowolafe, originally from Nigeria, live in Canada. True entrepreneur, run an asset management company called Dreammaker in the real estate, tech, and insurance industry. Dabbled into the venture space about 5 years ago, launching Dreammaker Ventures. 2 years ago, launching the first Black tech incubator out of a university in Canada, called the Black Innovation Fellowship. And now we're about to launch the first institutionally backed venture fund focused on Black entrepreneurs in Canada as well too. And we want to sort of make the Black Innovation Fellowship the bridge between Canada and Africa, and also from Africa to North America.
Brilliant, thank you. So thanks for such a comprehensive introduction from everybody. What I think the participants and audience is probably really interested to find out, given the title of this session, is really what are the key projects or initiatives in play at the moment that you're involved in that really support startup growth on the continent, and just some of your personal experiences in terms of the journey of supporting startup growth across the continent. I'm going to start with Dina, just because I know that you have a hard stop quite soon, so I want to make sure we get as much of you as possible.
Oh yeah, no worries. I think I can talk a little bit about the varying things that I've personally been involved in. Namely, at the Legatum Center at MIT, we have a student fellowship program that supports entrepreneurs from emerging markets, including Africa, who are studying at MIT, who will have access to a full year fellowship, which includes scholarship money, but also very focused and dedicated support to help their businesses grow and thrive. We're also about to launch a new fellowship program for entrepreneurs from Africa in specific who have been through the full entrepreneurial journey. So, you know, I've been an angel investor for many, many years, and I started my own business in Egypt right after the revolution. And excuse me. And I think one of the things that I noticed when I stepped down as CEO is when you go through a full entrepreneurial journey, there's very little in Africa that helps you graduate into more of an entrepreneurial leader, and where you can have a little bit of space to think about what you want to do next and how you want to play a much more active and effective role in building out ecosystems that will actually support entrepreneurs in a way that was better than what you had, right? And we see that often within very mature ecosystems. And I was talking about that in my last panel. In very mature ecosystems, you often see entrepreneurs who have been through the full entrepreneurial journey at the center of it, who are now becoming venture capitalists, who are now mentors, who are now helping get access, provide access to new startups, to the broader ecosystem more globally. So what we're doing is we're launching a fellowship specifically for entrepreneurs who are at an inflection point, who have been through this entrepreneurial journey, to also have a full 4-month immersive program that will really give them the space to think about what role they're going to play in Africa and building out these ecosystems further. And then obviously my company, Ahead of the Curve, worked on capacity building and training and technical assistance for over a decade, specifically focused on impact-driven entrepreneurs across the Middle East, which includes North Africa. And I think what we've seen in Africa is we've seen a massive rise in capacity building programs for entrepreneurs at that kind of seed to early stage that is being driven by foundations, philanthropic organizations, universities that are building out programs. I think that has been fantastic and really important. I think what we continue to need in Africa is a much more integrated ecosystems across the varying stakeholders. I still continue to see a lot of fragmentation and not a lot of collaborative effort across stakeholders. So when I say stakeholders, I mean universities, venture capitalists, corporates, entrepreneurs themselves, and policymakers. We need to see a lot better conversations. And I think we're seeing universities start playing these roles of conveners, bringing people together, but we really need to see that grow and expand so that we can see a lot more close collaboration, not only within localities. So I think what we need in Africa, especially with the rise and increase of inter-African trade and the increase in venture capital that we're seeing happen on the continent, we need to start seeing different ecosystems in Egypt and Nigeria and Kenya and across the country start collaborating closer together, so we can see our businesses scale across the continent, and that we're not seeing enough yet.
Definitely. And Raj, I wondered if you could come in here, especially with your legal background. We've talked about ecosystems and how important they are to grow and develop entrepreneurship, especially to the later stage of the journey. What type of investments are you making into the ecosystem actually for entrepreneurship in Africa? And what are maybe some of the legal issues around creating that ecosystem that you found?
So I think there's an education process, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs, they're so focused on getting the business off the ground that they don't necessarily think about some of the legal issues around how to structure their businesses. The reality, and the sad reality, is that most investors who are actually not local investors don't want to invest in a local company, right? So if you start up as a local company, then you often then have to then create a whole co-structure where usually it's a Delaware or a Mauritius or a UK company, etc. So if you think of things like that from the beginning, it's just one less thing that you become much more investor ready, right? So I think the thing that I find a lot of times that I'm looking at entrepreneurs, but I think it's getting better, by the way, is that are they ready and available to accept capital from abroad, right? And things like the intellectual property, where's the intellectual property sit? Because often if you sit intellectual property in local jurisdiction, you can have much larger problems in the future when you're trying to get it offshore. There's usually a tax consequence. So a lot of these things are pretty basic stuff, but obviously people are so focused on trying to get the business off the ground that they don't think about this basic stuff. So I think it's about education. They're not difficult things to do, and they're not even expensive things to do. They just needs to be done because people are not being guided in the right way. So one of the things I try and do initially is when I speak to an entrepreneur initially is that I actually look at these things and say, look, I'm happy to invest now, but here are the things you need to do to make yourself a more investable company, right? So So those are some of the things that I think I would say you need to be thinking about from a legal perspective. I think the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of collaboration that's missing. So, I think, the ecosystem needs to be much more collaborative about, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, sharing know-how, sharing precedents, and I think we will grow much faster.
And yeah, so a lot about sharing and collaboration. And I suppose now turning to Isaac with your experience, how do you succeed? So I'm a startup, I'm based in East Africa, maybe I'm in Kenya. How do I succeed? What does that journey look like? And if you can tell us from your personal experiences about startups that you've been working with, what does that journey look like? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
That's the phrase of 2020.
Can you hear me?
For us, is really creating an environment where we increase the chances of succeeding. So the reason why we created the Black Innovation Fellowship is really working with the diaspora. So there's a lot from the African community that are based in Canada, that want to get into the startup space and then want to be able to set up a company that could eventually go back to Nigeria, go back to Kenya, go back to Ghana. So what we're doing is creating that infrastructure and that environment for them to be able to come in, start their business, get all the tools that are required to get that business up and running, both from a legal point of view, a business plan point of view, a market placement point of view, an investment relation point of view, and then able to now go back into the marketplace that they want to scale that business. So what we've been doing with the infrastructure that we've been creating through Black Innovation Fellowship is working with entrepreneurs that are from the diaspora, that have ties to, let's say, Nigeria, and understand the scope of that market and say, if I were able to put these pieces together and I brought this to Nigeria, this is the marketplace that we have. So we're helping them build that infrastructure, laying down the tools for them to create, whether it be a CFO if they need it, or an operations, a director of marketing, basically all the key tools that they need for them to be successful. Understanding that it's a long road for them to be able to get to that success, especially when they want to start raising capital. And that's why now we're starting with our seed venture fund, so that at least we could give them that seed capital to get them going, right? So we're encouraging them on how to tap into the angel network through our incubator. And then we help lead their seed round. And then we help connect the dots when they hopefully get to the A round and up.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I recognize that, Dina, you have a few minutes left. So I want to just come back to you quickly, because
I'm also looking at the panel of, I just saw the panel.
Whoops.
Oh, hello.
Eniola, are you supposed to be on the panel? I think she went on.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so spoken a lot about ecosystems and joining up all of the necessary seed funding, but also political support, policymakers and things like that. From your point of view, there is no silver bullet, of course, for supporting startups across the continent. But if you could say there was one thing that you think is the biggest gap that still is really yet to be filled, what would that be in your opinion, Dina, and how could it be resolved?
Oh, that's a really tough one.
And again, there's no silver bullet, and I totally understand that, but one of the things that might keep you awake at night when you're thinking about the work that you do, that you think
honestly, the thing that keeps me awake at night when thinking about Africa and entrepreneurship and startups is that we're still at the tip of the iceberg. And we spend so much time talking about poverty and economic growth in Africa and the need to create jobs, but so little time focusing on investing in research and development, in really transforming our education systems to graduate students who are truly entrepreneurial in their thinking. I think in terms of, I think seeing a rapid increase in investments with regards to women entrepreneurs will transform the continent. We've seen so much data come out around how improving gender equality in the workplace and how investing in women entrepreneurs would have enormous impact on GDP growth, but will also have enormous impact on our societies, on the children of women who get access to capital. And I think we have yet to truly embrace that on the continent. But I think, you know, for me, I would say the gap is to really embrace entrepreneurship as the path to prosperity. And I don't think we've really embraced that in full yet, right? We're still very much looking to multilaterals and foundations and philanthropic capital to think about how we can alleviate poverty and fix our healthcare and fix our education. For me, I think we need to take ownership of these problems and to really use entrepreneurship and innovation to come up and innovate and find solutions to our own problems and scale those, while at the same time creating the wealth that we need, creating the jobs that we need, and solving our problems in a way that we need. And I think that for me is the gap that we need to fill, is to really adopt entrepreneurship as a tool, right? Not just look at it at tip of the iceberg and say, you know, let's see more venture capital, let's see more startups. We really need to embrace it as a true pathway to developing the continent.
Thank you so much. And I want to respect your time because you have 2 more minutes, and I think we just have a few more minutes anyway. I want to pick up on what Dina has actually said about being the tip of the iceberg entrepreneurship. And Raj, how can we make it more than that? So how can support for SMEs, for entrepreneurship, how can we go that bit further? Are we doing enough? And from your perspective, what more can be done and what more needs to be done?
So let me give you a very simple example, right? Which is, you know, you have in the UK, where I started my angel investing career here, you have something called the SEIS scheme and the EIS scheme. If you're not familiar, Enterprise Investment Scheme and Small Enterprise Investment Scheme. So basically, ordinary punters can invest their money, and if it's SEIS, the first £150,000 can be invested where if you invest in that amount, say you invest 100,000, the government gives you back up to £50,000 as a rebate against your tax. Similar in South Africa, you have the same similar sort of scheme where there's a sort of tax rebate scheme. And I think that's what's missing across the continent, because what's missing across the continent as well is access to capital at grassroots level, right? So fine, you can do the paste tax and get bought by Stripe, etc. But how do you start up as a guy in Ikeja, right? And he hasn't got a network. Where does he go to find the first $100,000? Okay. So that first 100,000, that initial capital is so key. And when you're, especially in a time of COVID, where no one is traveling, no one is engaging, etc., and people are reluctant to part with money, how do you then give access to capital? For me, is like the biggest challenge, right? And access to capital locally is even a bigger challenge because there aren't enough incentives to allow people locally to actually invest. The good news is that everyone has seen the good news stories, and I know Jumia didn't quite make it as a good news story, but the paste tax story was a good news story. That there's a much more interest, and you've seen a lot more angels and angel networks springing up across the continent. So there's a lot more interest in becoming angel investors. But I still think that a lot more can be done to create the framework, to create an ecosystem, to create the incentives for people to actually invest. And then at a later stage, pension funds, at bigger tickets, pension funds don't invest in alternative capital, whether it's venture capital or private equity, right? Because it's an asset class they just don't understand. It's too risky, right? So if there's an actual requirement that they must allocate a certain amount of money to VC or private equity, I think you'd get the wheels turning much more. There's a huge amount of capital in pension funds across Africa, and you just need to tap into it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Dina, in respecting your time, thank you so much for joining the session. I'm just going to ask my last question to Isaac just before you go, if that's okay, just to be fair to all speakers and give you a chance to discuss. I wanted to touch on one last thing. You talk about tapping into the diaspora. How can we actually better tap into the funds that the diaspora have in order to invest in the continent, in order to invest in startups? You know, there's family ties, there's cultural ties. How do we leverage that a lot better? Is that something that's not being tapped into quite as much as it should do?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's one of our goal is, we know there's billions of dollars being flowed in back and remittances into Africa, but it's not flowed in from an investment point of view. That's why if you go to areas like Nigeria, et cetera, there's a lack of infrastructure because there's not dollars flowing back into that infrastructure, whether it be roads, et cetera, or investment into property, et cetera, and now companies. So with us creating the Black Innovation Fellowship and now connecting with other universities in Africa to create that same incubator bridge, we're now able to encourage those in the diaspora and educate them on the aspect of investing as an angel investor into startups, invested as within an LP on the VC company, which is going to be investing into the startup, and then create that bridge through our startup program where the founders, if they're in Nigeria, could come to Canada for a few weeks or a couple months to pitch, be part of the incubator, whether it be a 2-month incubator. And then we're encouraging those in the diaspora that want to learn more about companies that are being built within their local country or their originated country and get exposed to it. So we're creating that environment for that exposure, because once that exposure starts, then we're able to connect the dots of the dollars that actually want to spend, but just don't know how to spend it.
Brilliant. So all of you, thank you so much for your time, Isaac, Dina and Raj. I wish we could discuss more, but thanks for your participation and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Nice.
Cheers.
Bye.